Well, thanks for the introduction, Dennis, and thank you all for coming along this evening. There's a great audience there. I'm just going to turn the lights off so that I don't have to look at you. No, I'm kidding. Actually, I pressed the wrong button. That's better. It should come on slightly. Oh well, if you fall asleep, I won't be able to see. Well, that's better. Okay, well, tonight I'm going to tell you about our the latest underwater robotic sampling platforms that Harbor Branch have acquired, and tell you a bit about the history behind the development of these rather unique platforms that are becoming quite widespread in marine science, and and some of the critical innovations that led to the development of the Oceanographic Glider. So we'll sort of summarize about 150 years in 3 slides, but we can talk later. I'm going to go on and, I think my objective, because usually I'm really confusing when I try and explain something, so my objective is that you guys can all go away from the talk understanding how these things work. So I'll try and convey that effectively. And I'm going to talk about some recent missions we did with these robotic sensing platforms in the Gulf of Mexico, right on the West Florida shelf, the Southwest Florida shelf, in support of some scientific research that several of the scientists at Harbor Branch were leading. So going back to the first ever global oceanographic research cruise, this was a 5-year effort, and there's some interesting stuff on the internet about this, but it was led by a guy called Sir Wyville Thompson, and it was the HMS Challenger. And so this was an effort to understand more about the oceans, and using the technology that was available in 1872. They were mainly dredging, to look at what's on the bottom, and we call that the benthic zone. And they were trawling to catch things in nets that are in the water column or the pelagic zone, and also trying to work out how deep the ocean is in places. And I'm sure in some places they didn't have a long enough rope, but they used like a lead line or a rope and a plummet. So, jumping forward a bit, there's a group of physical oceanographers in the sort of 1950s who really wanted to understand more about like deep ocean circulation. So, and this is possibly their innovation here, which was happening simultaneously and independently on both sides of the Atlantic. The innovation was to have a neutrally buoyant float that could go down to a certain depth and drift in a Lagrangian pattern, or drifting with the currents and then popping up, and from that information the scientists can derive something about the deep ocean currents. And later versions of these floats would have sensors on them that it would be measuring the salinity of the water, the temperature of the water, and obviously how deep they were at that instant. So there was a gentleman called Hank Stommel who was on this side of the Atlantic at Woods Hole, and another bloke called John Swallow in the UK, and they had developed similar types of neutrally buoyant floats. The one by Swallow here, this is John Swallow on the deck of the Discovery II, and much to the amusement of this cat, he's assembling his float, and these guys look like they're on their break or something. So he used just scaffolding tube, and they were tracking them underwater, at least getting bearings, using the float had a free running acoustic source. So it's similar technology to what's used today for tracking things underwater. So these floats were used extensively, and in some way the successors of these floats, by the way, this is the SOFAR float that was developed at Woods Hole, and I think they're they're not still used, but a version of them is still used. So they're very useful for physical oceanographers to understand about like mesoscale currents. So, you know, basically the understanding how the currents that flow around the Earth and how they do that, and using the data to validate models. And this is a present day visualization of the Argo Float program. And so as of 2 weeks ago, there was almost 3,500 floats around the Earth. And these ones are measuring temperature and salinity, and some other parameters like chlorophyll, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. So it's pretty scary. You'd think if you went out in your boat here, you had a good chance of hitting one, but don't be scared. It's just the size of the dots on the graph. They're actually quite small. They're not. This suggests that they're several tens of kilometers across. So really, this guy Hank Stommel was an innovative physical oceanographer, and you know, he'd certainly, from his experience with the sulfur floats, his philosophy was being that the top ideas in oceanography come from being able to make new observations, and you know, being able to have good spatial resolution and temporal resolution. So getting like data sets over a period of time from multiple locations. So having networked distributed sensing capabilities. And there was an article in 1989 in the Oceanography magazine called The Slocum Mission. It's actually a science fiction article written by Hank Stommel about, he's talking of this fictional government agency located on Nonamesset Island, which is a fictional island, and he's working with these types of neutrally buoyant floats that can move purposefully, and they send data back, you know, several times a day to a station via satellite, and there's some acoustic looking cables from the dock there, and really comparing this is another part of the article, comparing like the progress made in the 40s, between the 1940s and the 1970s, in terms of the US committing money and establishing like a network of upper air observing systems, and being able to do that in the ocean. And it appears that Hank Stommel's neighbor was this ocean engineer at Woods Hole, a guy called Doug Webb, who some of you may have heard of. He's still active in the ocean engineering community. And he was a guy that realized, and I think was trying to get it funded, his idea that if you add a pair of wings to one of these variable buoyancy profiling floats, you could produce a vehicle that can glide and move purposefully around the world's oceans, traveling at low speeds, so half a knot, but obtaining high quality sensor data, and using very little power, like half a watt. So this was back in 1989, and I'm going to jump to the present day shortly, but I'd just like to talk a little bit about the types of oceanographic processes that scientists like to study. And if you look at this is a representation of time scales, so temporal scales versus spatial scales in the horizontal plane. Try and think of that. And so we're going from processes that are at the molecular level, so they could be sub-millimeter, sub-second, and you know, having sensors that can measure things like that. Certainly down here, turbulent patch size. We had a project last summer with our postdoc, Dr. Gero Newts, where he was investigating this type of phenomena using a laser system in the Gulf Stream. We come up to Langmuir cells, which our speaker a couple of weeks ago was talking about, physical oceanography phenomena, internal waves, biological oceanography, plankton migration, internal tides. So all the way up to like climate change, which can occur over hundreds of years or tens of years and hundreds of thousands of kilometers. And this blue box here, these are the types of studies that can be supported by in situ non-stationary platforms. So this would be something like the Oceanographic Glider or the Lagrangian Drifter, autonomous underwater vehicles. And there's significant overlap with this bigger blue box, which some of these, especially phenomena that occur near the surface, can be sensed from space. And so I just wanted to point this out, but I mean, the technological advances pushed by these early pioneers like Swallow and Stommel and Webb, they've really brought the oceanographic community a very long way since the Challenger cruise. And we talked about satellite-based sensing, and I just pulled some data from a very heavy rainfall period a couple of years ago, showing Jupiter Inlet and Lake Worth Inlet. And this type of image is taken from space, and each one of these pixels, each one of these little squares, is about 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. But you can still sense certain things on the surface as long as they can be detected optically. Or there's some synthetic aperture radar and different types of radio frequency remote sensing systems. So these sensors are on a satellite orbiting the Earth, and they're useful, but for most scientific studies, in situ means like, actually in the location that you're going to be, that you're interested in. Getting platforms and sensors below the surface is necessary. So when we talk about working at sea, and there's some difficulties of working at sea with traditional technology like ships, and being at sea for a long period of time to obtain the sorts of data that we want in the previous slide there, as well as being extremely expensive to remain at sea for a long time, and with lots of personnel, highly paid personnel. There's the obvious challenges like the weather and strong currents, high pressure and density of the medium, corrosion. And really, marine scientists, they need much more comprehensive ocean observing capabilities that can be offered just using a ship and just taking a point measurement in order to get the data sets that allow them to better and properly understand some of these complex processes, climate change being one, ocean acidification, which is related, eutrophication, which is like excess of nutrients that can disturb the balance of ecosystem function, and studies into ecosystem health, like both the planktonic ecosystems that support, that are sort of lower in the food web, but support like the life of our fish that we eat, and but also coral ecosystems, and how they respond to changes in the environment over long periods of time requires sensors that can be put out for sea for a long time, and to reduce the costs, they should not require a lot of maintenance and intervention. And the data from these sensors needs to come to shore so that you can do the science now. So the science project is ongoing. You don't have to wait until you go and recover your package from the sea. Also for like catastrophic events like oil spills and harmful algal blooms, we require sensors that can be quickly deployed, transmit data back in real time so people can make decisions and understand what's happening. And the robotic gliders have really enhanced our capability to sense and monitor the ocean in recent years. So following probably several dozen unsuccessful attempts to get this gliding vehicle concept funded, which I'm sure the likes of Stommel and Webb did, the Office of Naval Research funded a program called Autonomous Oceanographic Sampling Network, and that ran from 1995 until 2000. So there were various platforms here, and obviously there's ships and moorings, propellered underwater vehicles, and then this is a vehicle called Sea Glider, which has now been commercialized by iRobot, but it's another type of glider. I think this is the Spray Glider, which was developed by Scripps under a physical oceanographer called Russ Davis, and this is Spray Glider, and this is the one that we have 2 spray gliders at Harbor Branch at the moment, and we partnered with the company that commercialized them. They're called Bluefin Robotics, they're in Quincy, Massachusetts, and their parent company is Battelle, which is a large not-for-profit, and we were able to get some seed funding to bring on a few new robotic gliders, and with certain sort of science and technology and education objectives, and they were interested in having a new optical sensor developed for the vehicle, so we're currently working on that, and we're working on improving the level of autonomy, so the decision-making capability of these vehicles, and how multiple vehicles can work together to accomplish a mission, like it could be a mission to trace out the extent of a plume, like could be a subsurface oil leak or a harmful algal bloom. Some tasks that are not possible to perform with one slow-moving vehicle, and so you have a network of these vehicles. So we're working on some engineering research to develop these capabilities, and also with our scientists here, we're working on some applications that would justify the development of a much deeper rated glider, one that could go to 2 miles. The current one can only go to 1 mile deep. So initial deployments of the systems were just a few months ago, or they finished a few months ago, but in the fall of 2011. And we're supporting Harbor Branch's Cooperative Institute in Ocean Exploration, Research and Technology. That's a NOAA program at Harbor Branch led by Professors Shirley Pomponi and John Reed and Dennis Hanasak. And this cruise was to explore like the shelf edge coral reef ecosystem and a particular area known as Pulley Ridge. So we deployed the glider in support of that mission. And also with the link building newly being completed, we have this is a variable density tank where we can ballast these vehicles. So being very close to being neutrally buoyant, they require very careful ballasting. And this is Drew Krupski, who's a grad student working with the gliders. And there's Ben Metzger, a mechanical engineer who really manages the glider program here at Harbor Branch. This is a engineering lab, a newly built lab that has a special projects area that we're using for the gliders at the moment, and some sensor calibration going on. So I'm going to explain to you how these gliders work, and then I'll show you an animation that will also show that. Firstly, just a brief one with so the spray glider. These things are rated to 1,500 meters. They use this little structure on the top here is a conductivity cell, which is part of this very kind of standard sensor for oceanography. That's conductivity, temperature, and depth, a CTD. And the CTD's been tested to be fairly resistant to biofouling, which would be the growth of algae and other things that feed on the algae, over long periods of time. The vehicle is a long-range vehicle. On one set of batteries, it can travel about 5,000 kilometers when it's diving to 1,000 meters. And so they dive at 19 degrees to the horizontal dive axis, and so really the way that it works starts off on the surface here, and by shifting some of the batteries on this little motor, the vehicle, so there's no external moving parts. The weight distribution gets changed internally, and then the vehicle spins over 90 degrees and sticks up its antenna and will communicate via Iridium, which is a satellite communications network. It will also obtain its GPS position and be able to send that via Iridium to anywhere in the world that you have an internet connection. In order to dive, it will shift back so the two wings are level, and then it moves another set of batteries on another little motor forward to change the weight distribution so it starts to dive. But in order to become negatively buoyant so that it can dive, it actually it pumps some oil from an external bladder, which is in a free flooding section of the vehicle, to inside the vehicle in a pressure vessel. So effectively it changes its volume, so it sinks. And it sinks slowly. It's like 20 centimeters per second. And it can dive down to 1 kilometer. These dives would take about 6 hours to go down and up. But the recent trip that we've been using the vehicles, we've been diving to like no more than about 70 or 80 meters. So once it senses with its depth sensor that it's getting close to its target depth, it can start to do the opposite. It will pump the oil from the internal bladder to the external bladder, and then it kind of starts to float again. But to help its attitude, it will then move the weight back, and that allows it to climb up back to the surface. And there's no control surfaces on the outside of the vehicle. It will change its weight distribution during a dive with another called the roll pack, which is the same pack that allows it to communicate. So it's more like a hang glider where it turns just by changing the weight distribution. So some of these things I spoke about, the antennas are for the communications and for GPS are in the wings, so there's some redundancy there. There's two wings. This is just a block diagram showing the roll pack, the forward pack, pitch pack. Packs are just battery packs. The only ones that move are the roll pack and the pitch pack. Control electronics, and here's this pump that will pump oil between the external reservoir to change the volume of the vehicle and the internal reservoir. It can communicate over short distances at higher bandwidths with radio frequency communications. And it has some sensors that I'm going to tell you more about, and an emergency drop weight. So if it hasn't returned to the surface and it believes there may be something wrong, it can drop a little weight. And that's after the talk. You can go and have a look at the vehicle, and we'll show you some of these things if you're interested. So the vehicles, they don't have a lot of space for sensors, but they do have some. So in addition to this conductivity, temperature, and depth, there is the option of having generally like 2 out of this selection. So it's like these are off-the-shelf sensors. As I say, we're developing a prototype, more advanced sensor for detecting the different components of oil. But for the missions at Pulley Ridge, we had a turbidity sensor that measures the scattering of light due to particulate in the water. The particulate is really what leads to water becoming murky. And we have a chlorophyll fluorometer. I'll explain how that works in a moment. Other sensors we have on the other vehicle: dissolved oxygen, some acoustic sensors. That's an acoustic Doppler current profiler, which will allow you to measure currents using acoustics. An altimeter tells you how far from the bottom it is, and a power sensor is photosynthetically active radiation that will tell you what sort of light level is on the bottom, and that can be important in deep photosynthetic communities like the Pulley Ridge. So that's just showing you how the sensors work. This is quite small sensors, but you can see there's two sensors there, and sticking out, just the head of this sticking out. So one of them is a turbidity sensor. So it's a fairly simple principle, quite a standard thing. An infrared lamp over a very short path length, like a couple of centimeters. There's a sampling volume, so really anything in here, whether it's some sediment or very small algae called phytoplankton, that's the base of the food web, or larger zooplankton that eat phytoplankton, or larval stage fish or crustaceans. Anything that's in there will produce a scattering signature with this type of sensor, and as this kind of water quality parameter, turbidity, is the output. And the other sensor we have on this vehicle is measures something that approximates the phytoplankton concentration, the relative phytoplankton concentration. Now these are types of phytoplankton. There's diatoms, very common type. I'm not sure what this is called, but they are primarily structured from chlorophyll A. So fluorescence is a way of measuring certain molecules as long as they fluoresce, and so this is if you consider that visible light is effectively from the blue, like the violet, which is from 400 nanometers up to 700 nanometers, which is called the far red, and so we can excite the chlorophyll molecule with blue light. Well, fluorescence is the re-emission of absorbed energy. So the chlorophyll will absorb blue light, and then a fraction later it will emit light at a lower energy level, so it will emit red light. So we can measure the concentration of chlorophyll A using a very simple sensor. It's actually exactly the same form factor as the other sensor, and this would be it here in this vehicle. So these are the two things that we're measuring in this mission to Pulley Ridge. So I'm going to show you an animation of how the glider works. So here we are on the surface, and this is a particularly calm day. So it's been communicating and getting its GPS fix, and now it's the roll pack shifts back over, so the vehicle's got like a level attitude, and this is speeded up. This all happens quite slowly. It's probably 200 times faster than actual here, but it would be tedious to watch a 40-minute video of one dive. But so here we go. It's completed one. So one of these cycles is called a yaw, where it goes up and down. And here we're operating in fairly shallow water. I think the scale is 60 meters, the same as Pulley Ridge. And you can see the chlorophyll fluorometer is the little blue light there, and the one that you can't see is the infrared turbidity sensor. And so now it's starting to do it's doing a roll here. That it won't quite roll that fast, but it shifts the weight from left to right rather than that along the longitudinal axis of the vehicle. And all the time gathering sensor data. And because we have accurate knowledge of the bathymetry of this site, how high the topography comes relative to the surface, we can program the vehicle so it dives within about 5 meters of the bottom. So we can get data right down to that interesting layer where the pelagic zone couples with the benthic zone. And so then when it comes back to the surface, that was you doing like multiple dives before surfacing, which is a strategy that you have to use to fight strong currents, because currents tend to be stronger on the surface. And now it can acquire a GPS, so it knows its position relative to where it knows it should have been, and it can also send data back from these dives so that people in labs and offices can use the data immediately. They don't have to wait to recover the vehicle. So let me tell you about the FLOSEE II cruise. That's the Florida Shelf Edge Exploration 2, because there was a 1 in 2010. And so really the broad objectives of the cruise are to locate and characterize deep reefs, focusing on coral and commercial fish, and assess the effectiveness of a marine protected area for restoring coral and fish. It's a known breeding ground for fish, and so you're not supposed to fish there. And this is Pulley Ridge here. So it's the ship left out of Key West, and I think it was 100 miles. In the video I'll show you shortly, we had the glider come to a rendezvous point like 2 months after the cruise, and we took a fishing boat off Naples and recovered it. And we've actually now changed all the batteries and put it back out there. So at the moment, the same vehicle is back there. And the one that's out there in the lobby will be going back out there soon as well. So the FLOSEE II cruise, this was to achieve these objectives, the technologies needed. It's a large NOAA research vessel that has a multi-beam sonar, so you can generate 3D C4 maps. The spray gliders for water column work, and there's a remotely operated vehicle, an ROV called the Kraken II, operated by the University of Connecticut. And that vehicle would take video of the bottom so that scientists can identify different types of coral or sponges or algae. And also it had a manipulation capability, and it was able to sample physically specimens of coral or sponge so that they can take them back and do all the lab analysis where they look at the microbial communities or they express the genes. And so there's a lot of samples needed for doing these lab studies. And then this system called MOCNESS, which is a multiple opening and closing net system. It's a plankton collection system, and I'll tell you a bit more about that. In fact, there is MOCNESS, and so it has some big nets come out the back, and it gets towed through the water, and the nets open and close at certain depths so that you can characterize what's in the water in terms of the plankton and larvae and other particles. And another sensor from out of my lab, this List-Stokes, is an optical sensor that classifies plankton based on its structure. So there's an excellent opportunity to put this sensor onto a real plankton collection system so we could ground truth the results. This is the Kraken ROV, so it's a large system, carousel. It's not a very good picture, but there's a carousel here for putting samples in so they don't cross-contaminate, and lots of cameras and lights, and a manipulator arm. And this is just another instrument which you find on most research vessels. It's a CTD rosette, so it has this conductivity, temperature, and depth, and other sensors, and it also allows you to collect water. So these are water sampling bottles called Niskin bottles. So the cruise was really, I'm showing Pulley Ridge here. This is some previously taken multi-beam bathymetry. And there's a marine protected area shown by here. So we're studying within the marine protected area and outside. The remotely operated vehicle dives that were done by the Kraken II are these green stars. And usually in the vicinity of these operations, mock nest trawls would be conducted. So characterizing and ground truthing the plankton and other things in the water. So the glider really just, we set some waypoints to cruise over to various sites and loiter, so collect day and night data over a few days, looking at changes in scattering, which is the turbidity sensor, and chlorophyll, as well as conductivity and temperature, all as a function of depth. And so Pulley Ridge is a fairly unique type of deep coral reef ecosystem. It's greater than 60 meters deep, so it's not a reef that many people dive on, but it still has a largely photosynthesizing community. So corals, sponges, and macroalgae. But at that depth, it's incredibly dim, even when the water's clear, and so there's really only about 1 or 2% of the light that's available at the surface reaches the bottom of the reef, where there is light-depending organisms. And that's pretty unusual for Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean region. It's also interesting that the fish and crustacean populations are both shallow water and deep water, and they share this habitat. And it's a known breeding ground. And because it's right on the edge of the West Florida shelf, the loop current interacts with Pulley Ridge, and it brings in like clear, warm water. And it's probably one of the reasons why it's been able to sustain life this deep. We found when you head east of Pulley Ridge, the water clarity, where there's no coral reefs, but it's shallower water, the water clarity is, which isn't being flushed by the loop current, degrades significantly. And the ridge is actually within a thermocline, so during upwelling, there's nutrients are brought in from deep water, and it's also the home to some large pelagic animals. So really the more specific engineering and scientific objectives of these deployments, having really only done some short dives with the gliders up to that point, we wanted to evaluate the performance of the gliders at these shelf edge reefs, where, because of the proximity to the loop current and the Gulf Stream, currents are highly variable. So there's all these moving water masses, and temperature and salinity are changing significantly, and therefore density of the water changes. And the gliders depend on the density of the water being within certain limits, or they will sink. And so we wanted to evaluate that type of in that environment, and also because very little data exists using gliders in these types of areas over long durations. These, although the reefs are in 60, 70 meters of water, we're still in this euphotic zone, so from top to bottom there's light, and when there's light and there's nutrients, things grow, like algae will grow on the vehicle and around the sensors. So we wanted to evaluate the effects of over these 2 to 3 month missions of biofouling. And for the scientists who study both the water column and benthic ecosystems, just understanding the variability in parameters like temperature and salinity and chlorophyll A, turbidity, it's really crucial information to regarding, when they're correlating observed fluctuations in ecosystem function on the seabed. They need to understand what's going on in the water column. So we aim to use the gliders to provide like a large-scale distribution of phytoplankton concentrations above the reefs and in the surrounding waters where, the waters where it's above an area that doesn't have such a healthy benthic ecosystem. Some threats to this type of ecosystem could be if there's persistent elevation and turbidity and less light reaches the bottom, then the benthic inhabitants that depend on light could die over a period of time. And also where persistent salinity depressions, if there's coastal effects or heavy rains and hurricanes, like if the salinity is too low, corals will die. And that's happened before on the east coast of Florida. Persistent temperature elevations lead to coral bleaching. So really being able to monitor these parameters over time will give us a better understanding of the health of the ecosystems. So I'm just showing this plot here where so we've colored the track of the glider here is color coded for dive number, which is also time. So this was when it was deployed off the research vessel, and this is when it reached the rendezvous point, which is here, which is only about 80 miles on a speedboat from Naples. I'm just showing this because with the effect of the currents and the variability in the currents, the glider can rarely it doesn't travel in straight lines. It gets pushed off course. It has to fight back, pushed off course, does little loops. And we had some problems with very strong currents, and we really worked out that staying off the surface was important. So there are some models are available. You can get this online on NOAA's website, and this is Pulley Ridge in here, and the very strong currents. So the currents are round about half a knot or less. That's what this color bar shows. Now the reds here, like up off Georgia here, that's like about 3 knots. That's in the Gulf Stream. But the size of, it's hard to see, but these are little arrows that show the direction, and the length of the arrow shows the magnitude. So I just pulled this data showing like a 5-day period starting on Monday, and if you look at this sort of area, you can see how much it changes. So there are tools. We can actually use this type of model and obtain higher resolution. This is all modeled, so it's pretty amazing. But a lot of actually the advancements in having these real-time ocean forecasting models for currents came because of these float programs or at least they're able to validate them. So we developed a tool using this. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Google Earth. It's free software, and it's actually very powerful. It's a potent tool, and it's easy to use for developers. So we're able to import sensor data and the track data of the vehicle, and then you can plot the trajectory of the vehicle, color coded. This is temperature, so red is warm, blue is colder, and it's kind of cool, but to actually extract good scientific information, we're not currently using this type of plot. But it can be useful to, if you can underlay the bathymetry, then it's a good way to look at some changes. But I'm going to show you a movie of the deployment. It's about 5 or 6 minutes, showing how these vehicles, how we get them in the water, and how we pull them out, and some of the things that need to be done on the boat. So if we'll just play the movie now. This is Pulley Ridge, so Key West here. It's quite a trip out there. And it's a marine protected area. Very on the edge, the southern edge is close to a very steep slope that leads down into the Florida Straits. There's a lot of life on the bottom, it's a sort of rocky substrate. This is video taken by our manned submersible, the JSL, a few years, in 2010. So the sponges, corals, this is the macroalgae, and this camera has a little laser, there's 2 laser spots you'll see there, as well as my third one, and just to size things. Some hard corals, and so the vessel, the glider was deployed off the research vessel. In September, it was a very calm day. It wasn't like that when we went out to pick it up. Here's just showing again on the surface, and I think it's done its pre-dive check, and the oil is slowly being pumped from the external bladder to the internal bladder, and actually it will dive tail first. It does that sometimes if it's heading in that direction. So Brian, who's standing at the back of the room with this terrestrial video camera, he was the guy that jumped in the water with it to take some video of it at the rendezvous point, which wasn't at Pulley Ridge. It was about, I think, 50 miles from Pulley Ridge. A lot of things in the water, coastal effects, possibly a sediment resuspension. So it takes about 10 minutes to now it's rolling over, and then once it's over, it takes about 10 minutes to do the communications, to get its GPS fix, to do a few calculations and send its engineering data before it proceeds on a dive. And we usually do like at least 2 dives before we're happy to leave the scene, just so there's somebody. We have a field team. This is a field team. Then we have guys in the office that receive the emails from the vehicle and check out the engineering data. And that was Ben on a satellite phone, just checking with them about making sure there's no unusual parameters. And actually, what happened here was that one of the vehicles did have an abnormally high pump current, and we knew that it wasn't going to last so we actually recovered it. But this is the recovery of the vehicle that was out for 2 months, vehicle 507, and so we just had, a combination of engineers, researchers, students are involved in the program, and there was a lot of algae that had grown in the vehicle. Some of it's been wiped off during the recovery, but that slows it down. That increases the friction. These are like goose barnacles, and they had actually started growing on it. That's a fairing that Ben just popped off that just reduces the drag coefficient. But underneath the fairing, where there's a little, the water's not moving so fast. That's the chlorophyll fluorometer. And what we did was we took it off and put it in salt water rather than cleaning the viewport straight away, so we could then calibrate it before it got clean, so we could look at its response after the marine growth had grown. So, that day we recovered the 507, And you know, there's a saying with when you're operating like autonomous underwater vehicles that, you know, you might not get any data, something might go wrong, but every day is a good day when the vehicle comes home. And but with gliders now, it's kind of different. It's like every day is a good day when the vehicle doesn't come home, because the idea is that, you know, it's like a child leaving home or something. You just want to, you know, please stay away but take care. But so yeah, we had to come back with one of them because it malfunctioned. But so one of them did come home. But now they're back out there, and or one of them is back out there, and now we're into a different season where, you know, we can obtain data on that site, and there is a continuation of the research program with Harbor Branch scientists and University of Miami are going to be studying Pulley Ridge for the next 3 years. So here's just an example of some data. This is the temperature data set. So, you know, from September when it was deployed, the redder it gets, the hotter it is. So that's the temperature color bar. So you can, you know, just between September and November, there's a drop in temperature. But the position of the thermocline changes. These are there's some variations here that are not, they're possibly tidal, but it could be internal waves. And you also see them on the salinity. There was a time, I think, when there was very rough seas that the mixing is almost from top to bottom. This is like 55 meters. Temperature is almost the same. Obviously, the cooler waters closer to the seabed, it's denser. And this is the salinity data set. So this is over about 6 weeks or something, I think, this record. So you know, I think the salinity, we were near shore here. We hadn't reached the ridge yet. I can't remember what dive number we reached the ridge, but the lower salinity is probably coastal effects. And then we have this mixing again. And so that's, and then looking at the turbidity sensor output, everything left of this line was when we were on the ridge. And when we went to the rendezvous point, and, you know, we're going into water that's not really influenced as much by the loop current. So it's not being flushed with clear water in the same way as when you're on the edge of the West Florida shelf. So we definitely saw elevated scattering, and originally we thought, well, the sensor must be fouled, but when we looked at it, its response hadn't changed significantly. So it's you know, coastal effects or sediment resuspension, which can last for a long time. And the chlorophyll data, it was seen that the chlorophyll peaked at about 40 meters, and this is data from this profiler, and the different colors here just represent different sites on Pulley Ridge. This is depth, and this is the chlorophyll concentration in micrograms per liter. The glider data that we took more recently, looking at chlorophyll here, we're seeing this is a different type of plot. That's a depth versus lat long, so it's a positional plot. It's compressed. It's easier to look at when the yaws are compressed, and the color bar is just the concentration of chlorophyll. But when we looked at so we know that the chlorophyll is persistent in September and last week at about 40 meters on the ridge. And so one interesting thing that we looked at was, well, you know, this scattering layer, which is here, when we were above the ridge, you know, we're certainly seeing scattering signatures. It gets more intense towards the bottom, and you know, it consists of everything that scatters light, whether it's sediments or bacteria or phytoplankton, zooplankton, fish larvae, dust, that will be present in this signature. But then to try and delineate it somewhat, we know that the zooplankton will migrate through the water column at night, so it sort of comes up. They're sensitive to light, but when the sun is not out, they'll come up and they tend to graze on the phytoplankton, which is around about 40 meters. So we split the data up by this is day and this is night, and there's definitely a suggestion that the scattering layer rises to about the 40-meter mark, at least through this part of the data. But we also have the mock nests from a lot of these sites. We actually collected the plankton with the mock nest system, the multiple opening and closing net system. So we know what was there. We know what was in the water, although we couldn't really operate that system any closer than about 10 meters from the bottom. And these are some of the critters that they found. And there's right from like baby fish and different like egg cases. These guys are mainly zooplankton. Certainly diatoms are phytoplankton. I think this rhyolarians is a phytoplankton, and these are microscope images. So these things are small. They're probably ranging from single to tens of microns to a couple of millimeters, and they scatter light. So that's the sort of thing that we were getting scattering signals from, and what we're in the Ocean Visibility and Optics Lab, we have a couple of projects to develop scattering sensors, more advanced scattering sensors that can be used to more rapidly classify things like this based on their shape, so their morphology, their size distribution, and their structure. So, but actually, people say, well, okay, gliders are good, you can put sensors on them and you can measure, but you can't collect samples. Well, they're wrong, because we managed to collect some gooseneck barnacles, I think they are. So, I've got a few slides just showing the future developments with these types of vehicles, and that we're preparing proposals for with our partners, Bluefin Robotics. So this is a longer range spray vehicle it has more space for sensors, and it's also would have a duration, endurance of 1 year or 9,000 kilometers. So really the type of mission that we first did on Pulley Ridge, where it's shallow water, that drains the batteries really quickly compared to the deep missions, because you're constantly having to pump the oil to do these shallow dives, and if you're diving to like a kilometer or more, you're pretty much not using any power. You're just gliding through the water, and you only have to use power when you turn, so it's much lower duty cycle on the power budget. And another initiative we have is to enhance the vehicles with more onboard processing capability and have acoustic modems, and that's for these missions that we would use more than one vehicle, and they would be behaving collaboratively to track the source of a plume, or trace out the boundaries of an algal bloom with good spatial and temporal resolution. So really, to summarize, the spray gliders, they've been demonstrated to be capable working in areas with variable currents. They weren't extremely strong currents, but we're going to get into that later. And we were able to measure distributions in turbidity and chlorophyll. We're still working on the data, although we'll do a preliminary presentation next week over at Ocean Sciences meeting in Salt Lake City. And it is a cost-effective tool. Once it's in the water, the person who pilots it in their office with their internet connection. It's taking about 10 man-hours a week just to keep an eye on the vehicle and to change the waypoints. But I think for deeper missions where the vehicle only surfaces once every 6 or 8 hours, that would be less. So it uses less resources than traditional ship-based sampling. When we did encounter strong currents and we were unable to meet our waypoints, doing multiple underwater dives like the animation showed and reducing surface time really helped. You know, when it surfaces and the currents are fast, then it's really, you know, it gets pushed back. It's like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So that was effective. But I think to obtain more comprehensive data sets and understanding the phenomena under study, and particularly this coupling between pelagic and benthic zones, and looking at the health of an ecosystem like that and how it changes with, due to climate change and other parameters, longer term monitoring and continued benthic assessment will be needed. But I think as part of this 3-year program that's starting soon, we're going to get the chance to go back there and understand more, getting richer data sets, and maybe be able to try some of our new sensors that provide more information about the environment. But I think importantly, the glider program that we have at Harbor Branch and at FAU is it could be an ideal ocean technology and marine science education platform, where we can inspire younger people, who haven't decided what they're going to do for a career yet, to maybe get into ocean technology or ocean science. And I think that's just really critical now with the rate that the planet is changing, to get like bright young minds thinking about the big problems and coming up with solutions, and to solve the challenges that the planet has in the coming years. Well, thank you for listening.